Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar entitled Large Group in Center Time Behavior Management. Before we get started, take a minute and make sure that your volume on your computer is turned up all the way and that you can hear me adequately. And then we will move on. Well, again, welcome. And I'm Corinne Fennelly, and I work as a Senior Training Specialist here at Best Practices Training at Georgia State University. And we are joined by Sherry Howard, our Project Director. So today's webinar, like the other webinars, we will follow the same format. We will go from 3 to about 4 o'clock. There will be approximately 45 minutes of presentation, and we'll leave 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. Remember to submit your questions throughout the webinar. Don't wait to the very end. That way we can do our best to get to all the questions in the Q&A session at the end. There is a note-taking guide for this webinar like the others, and you can access it online through Georgia View. You can follow along using the guide throughout the webinar. If you haven't had a chance to print it out yet, feel free to access that note-taking guide after the webinar. The webinar and the note-taking guide will be available after the webinar is complete. So as a reminder, all of the recorded webinars will be archived on Georgia View, not on the Best Practices website or the Right from the Start website. So you can access the webinar and the note-taking guide all in one place. So as with the previous webinar, there will be a discussion board component, and that will help you apply a lot of the material that's presented today. So ideally, you should complete the discussion board assignment before the next scheduled webinar next month in February. And the description of the webinar's discussion board assignment will be posted on Georgia View in the discussion section on the left-hand column. So there are two main objectives that we're going to focus on today's webinar. First, we'll explore the common behavior problems teachers experience during large group and center time. And then we'll review classroom-wide strategies and discuss how to individualize these strategies for specific children. As you know, large group and center time are very important times of day. This specific webinar topic was actually decided based on need. We did a formal survey back in the summer of 2012, and many of you were asked to identify when you experience challenging behaviors the most. And collectively, the majority of all the lead teachers that were questioned responded to this question and identified large group and center time as the most problematic times of day. As we proceed through the webinar, don't forget some of the key principles from the previous webinars that we've discussed. Remember to focus your time and attention on things you can control in the classroom, like how you act, your attitude, and your classroom environment. Also, remember to isolate what triggers behavior by answering the questions, what part of the brain are they using, and why are they behaving this way? And as always, your strategies and techniques should be used with the intention of teaching some type of social-emotional skill. So first, let's take a close look at what occurs during large group. Our discussion of large group starts with why you do large group to begin with. Sometimes the whole purpose of large group gets lost along the way. Even worse, it is easy to get so caught up in our own agenda that we don't use large group for what it's truly intended for. Large group is not the best time to teach new concepts. It is best to use large group as a time to review and to reinforce learning. Large group is also a social time for many children and best used for things like story reading. There's music and movement. Retelling and acting out stories is fun, and also being able to practice previously acquired skills. If you are constantly introducing complex new concepts to children in large group, it'll be harder to keep the entire group engaged in learning. Like with teaching in general, the overall goal or objective is to provide children the support and guidance they need to learn. This can look very different depending on the group or the child you're working with. It's easy to fall into traps that can increase the likelihood of challenging behavior occurring in your group. First, you want to avoid losing the group. It goes without saying, keeping 22 active, energetic 4- and 5-year-olds engaged is difficult. Be prepared to step out of your comfort zone and mix it up a little bit. Be more exciting, you might have to be more engaging, and even be more animated if needed. Second, pay attention and listen to children's cues during group. Having a plan and maintaining structure is a good thing, but if a teacher becomes too rigid, it can render them ineffective. In the end, the children and the teacher become frustrated. For example, you may have a plan to read The Hungry Caterpillar, but about halfway into the story, if you start noticing children moving around more, acting more distracted, and having side conversations, then that's a problem. A flexible teacher is going to read those cues and adjust the activity to re-engage the children. Along those same lines, you have to be prepared when things don't go according to plan. Adjusting the activity for the entire group is often needed, but you also have to have alternative plans for the resistant children. You essentially have one lesson plan for large group for the entire class and another large group plan for the child that you anticipate resisting large group. Not having this alternative plan will have you scrambling to make accommodations right in the middle of group, which is more disruptive than if you had the plan in mind from the start. The last large group trap to avoid is not incorporating enough movement. With the average attention span being about 15 minutes for a 4- and 5-year-old, it's crucial to build movement into your group. Using songs, dances, you could role play, you could reenact stories, use jumps, stretches, yoga, anything to create more movement in your group will be good. As you know, anything can happen in large group, but the most common problems usually involve children who do not pay attention, children who disrupt the group, or children that seek attention. As with all behavior, knowing the why will help you determine the strategy. Some common causes of challenging behavior in large group involve children being bored, either because the activity is too challenging for them, or maybe it's not challenging enough. Sometimes they're confused about what the expectations are for large group. Either way, your documentation should help you uncover the why. Most children experience large group as a fun and exciting activity. For these children, they love learning. They love the communication and the social connection that occurs during large group. But for other children, the very thought of large group is very stressful. Sitting still in a small area with 21 other children can be overwhelming. Not to mention, these children are often easily distracted by other children, and they have a hard time controlling their impulses during group time. When a child feels stressed and overwhelmed in large group, they can either become withdrawn or they do something to disrupt the group. For these children, learning in large group can be very difficult. You need to have a plan just in case their behavior becomes so disruptive that it starts to interfere with other children learning. Energetic and hyper children will typically benefit from having something to fidget with. Inattentive children need help staying engaged, so making them your large group helper will give them purpose. You could have them be in charge of waving a magic wand during transitions, or you could have them be in charge of turning book pages or holding props. Also, it's sometimes necessary to take mini brain breaks throughout the group before children start to lose interest in what you're doing. Anytime you implement a new strategy, there's an adjustment period for you and the other children. The child who is using challenging behavior will need time for the strategy to be effective. The other children will need time to adjust to the accommodations that are being made. The children may ask questions to understand what's going on. Address their questions openly and honestly. The example on the screen is an effective way to address other children's concerns. Children in inclusive classrooms usually adjust faster because they are used to accommodations being made for other children. But children that aren't used to being in an inclusive classroom may have more questions and need a longer time to adjust. Don't let the other children pressure you into thinking that making accommodations for other children is unfair. Providing children support they need is never wrong or unfair. For example, just because Rebecca is sitting in the library area with animals during large group does not mean every child needs to do the same. There is more than one way for children to learn. Rebecca may have a different set of skills she needs to learn before she can appropriately participate and engage in large group. Providing individualized instruction to children means that not every child will need the same thing or learn the same way. Here are some guidelines to follow when using alternative activities for children during large group. First, don't make a big deal about it. The bigger deal you make it, the more your children will fuss too. If you have to hand a child a manipulative to fidget with, you can quietly hand him the object without drawing attention to it. Second, provide an activity that helps the child develop skills they lack. Remember that these children are behaving in a negative way because they lack skills to begin with. Your goal should not be to punish a child for not participating in large group, but it should be to teach them how to participate in large group appropriately. Lastly, avoid alternative activities that are too distracting to the other children. The alternative activities you choose should be calm and intentional. If you have a small area that you use for large group, you know firsthand space limitations can present its own set of challenges. Overcrowding and having children sit too close to one another can be the root of the problem. If you are unable to rearrange your classroom for a better setup, then you want to make sure that you use a variety of verbal and visual cues throughout your large group to help children stay focused on you. If you're working with a small area, it also helps to break up your large group activity into smaller segments with ample opportunities for children to stand and stretch. You may also find yourself having to reinforce certain social skills more than others, like teaching your children how to ignore others that get on their nerves, or how to respect personal space and boundaries when children are so close together. As a reminder, whether your large group area is big or small, having children sit in predetermined individual spaces can help children maintain better boundaries. It can also help them feel more safe and secure. You can use graphics already printed on your rug, or you can place tape on the carpet with names, shapes, or colors, anything that you think would be attractive for your children. Most teachers adhere to the crisscross applesauce principle in large group. For some, this is very effective to keep children calm and focused. But a common misconception is that if children do not sit crisscross, then they will be out of control and less likely to focus. In most real-life situations, forcing anyone to sit or stand in a specific position, especially if they are uncomfortable, can make the most patient child start to get fidgety and frustrated over time. The same is true in some of our classrooms. Depending on the characteristics of your children, being forced to sit crisscross the entire group time could actually cause more problems than it solves. Some children find that position simply uncomfortable and very restrictive. The goal is to help children focus and learn. If they learn better kneeling or having their legs stretched out in front of them, that's if your space permits this, then as long as they're sitting in their designated spot and still paying attention, then you'll have a much more comfortable and engaged learner in the long run. Some children are natural-born leaders. They like to be in charge. They love to set the example and help everyone out. Intentionally use these leaders in your large group. You can use them to model appropriate behavior or motivate others to make good choices because they're setting a good example. You can also pair a resistant child up with a child who really likes large group. Using the buddy system in this situation can help children feel more motivated, they feel more safe and secure. Most every group has at least one chronically wiggly and disruptive child. Keeping them in close proximity to a teacher is usually the first intervention teachers try. You could also try placing them in the back of the group to minimize how disruptive they are to others. If these wiggly children are placed up front, everybody will be paying attention to them instead of you. But if these wiggly children are placed in the back, then they're behind the group and the other children are more likely to focus on you. The next tip is pretty obvious, but many lead teachers get into the trap of trying to do too much on their own. You have an assistant teacher for a reason. They are there to help you teach, and they can be a huge asset during large group. Start by communicating with your assistant in advance about your plan for large group and any alternative plans you have for children with challenging behaviors. They can help monitor and redirect children. They can facilitate alternative activities for children if necessary. You can also collaborate with your assistant teacher and have them conduct large group occasionally. This can be helpful to both of you by breaking up your daily tasks, but this can also be very refreshing for the children. Like at other times of the day, when you have a resistant child, it would not be beneficial to give him free rein to choose any alternative activity he wants. This could be misinterpreted as a reward. Instead, you control the choices by giving two positive choices. In this example on your screen, you could tell Evan that he can do the butterfly dance with the group, or he can quietly read a book in the library area till he is ready to join everybody. His choice. Likewise, be very intentional about noticing positive behaviors in your large group. Noticing positive behaviors will motivate and reinforce the desired behavior. Remember to specifically describe what you observe children doing. In the example on your screen, it says, Marcus, you follow directions and help Lucas. I am so proud of you. Writing a social story for a resistant child can be effective as well. We talked about social stories in previous webinars. So as a reminder, CEFL, which is the Center for Social Emotional Foundations for Early Learning, their website has great examples of social stories. They also give tips on how to create social stories. The website is listed on your resource page in your note-taking guide, and you can also find it in the previous note-taking guides and from the previous webinars. So before we move on, just a reminder to keep sending your questions in about these topics so we can do our best to answer them at the conclusion of the webinar. So next, let's shift gears and look at center time. So the purpose of center time is to give children time to learn through play. As they play and explore centers, they are developing critical skills that are essential to kindergarten preparedness. So center time is a child-directed activity where children can freely choose what center they are in. There are no time limits for playing in a particular center, and children should not rotate centers unless they freely do so on their own. It is tempting to try to limit how many children are in particular centers to maintain order, but to make sure every child has equal and ample opportunity to play in the area of their choosing, there should be no predetermined caps or limits on how many children are allowed in a particular center. The only times you can restrict how many children are in a center is when there are safety concerns or when there is limited equipment. For example, you can limit how many children are in a loft area since there is a risk of injury if it gets overcrowded. Also, if there are only 2 computers, then you can limit the computer area to 2 children at a time. Your dramatic play and block area should be your largest centers since they are usually the most popular. Each of these centers should be arranged to accommodate at least 5 or more children at a time. Center time should last for 1 hour, and this does not include time to clean up. It's a common mistake to not leave enough time for cleanup after center time, or cleanup is often lumped together into the 60 minutes that is supposed to be allotted for center play. So when this occurs, cleanup is often rushed and it's very stressful. Cleanup time is not a roadblock to getting to your next activity. Cleanup time is your next activity. Allocating at least 15 minutes for cleanup after center time is more effective than only allocating 5 minutes. If you think about it, there are a lot of critical skills that children practice during cleanup time. There are thinking skills, they practice reading environmental print, they practice classifying, matching and sorting, they organize materials, they have an opportunity to communicate with others, and practice negotiating and helping others. So rushing through this cleanup time can often be the cause, or at least a contributor, to challenging behavior. It's difficult to monitor whether each child is cleaning up their materials before moving on to the next center. You want to avoid creating rules that are difficult to enforce. Children cleaning as they go sounds good in theory, but the technique can often cause more problems because other children usually want to play with the materials that another child's told to clean up. So instead, teach the value of organization and working as a team, stressing that everything has a place and it is everyone's responsibility to put things away and to help out. The goal is to have the area clean whether they played with the items or not. Whether it is a song, a chant, or a sign, most children will respond to your first cue that it is time to clean up. Others, on the other hand, will need more assistance. Some children will need one-on-one help transitioning from playtime to clean up. If necessary, you can model how to clean up. You could use buddies or peer modeling. You can even use visuals. In this example, the teacher used clip art to visually represent what steps the child had to take to complete the routine. Simple, inexpensive, and very effective. Cleanup time can be stressful for many children. It's hard to stop playing. They have to switch gears and move to something else. The phrase cleanup can be a trigger in and of itself for some children, especially if cleanup time at home is difficult, and at home it leads to power struggles. So sometimes even using different phrasing, like it's time to put your toys away, or it's time to put our toys back where they belong so we can find them later, can be less threatening and promote more of a spirit of cooperation. Some children resist cleanup because it means they can't complete an important project that they've been working so hard on. Or maybe they finish a project that they're very proud of and they don't want to take it apart or put it away. Taking pictures of the children's work and putting it on display, or even sending a picture home, helps preserve their feelings of accomplishment and pride. You can also give children 2 positive choices during cleanup time. For example, on the screen you can read the example of 2 positive choices for Tara. The teacher says, Tara, you can put the paintbrushes or markers away. Which one do you choose? Another set of choices could involve not just what they clean up, but who they clean up with. For example, the teacher can say, you can help Jacob or Hannah put the blocks away. Being told to clean up the entire science area could be a bit daunting and overwhelming for some children. Remember, children typically avoid things they feel are too difficult for them. So some children will need you to break the cleaning process down into smaller chunks to help make it more manageable. So instead of saying, clean up the science area, you could say, please put 5 things away in the science area. Or, in an attempt to be even more specific, you could say, put the dinosaur blocks away in the science area. You can also assign jobs that help promote positive behavior and cooperation during center time. You could have an inspector, or you could have the art center helper or block area helper. In fact, you can assign a helper to each center during cleanup time to help in that process. Sometimes it may be necessary to use a management system at the beginning of the year to teach children how to rotate to different centers. But once children understand the routine, taper off the system in order to promote more free choice and problem solving. For example, maybe each child is initially taught to move their clothespin or popsicle stick to the next center they move to. If there's not enough space on the display for their name or their picture, then it can unintentionally deter them from actually choosing that center. The guidelines for center time have changed throughout the years, so some teachers don't have a use for these systems for the entire year anymore like they used to. Another tip that can ward off problem behavior is to be flexible to accommodate children's choices. If a child wants to play with cars in the block center, but that center is really crowded, move the cars to the table instead. If the dramatic play area is packed, then move some dolls to the reading area for children to use instead. Providing children with individualized workspaces help create boundaries for children. These spaces also help children keep materials organized, and they reinforce sharing and turn-taking. For larger areas, you can use hula hoops or carpet squares on the floor, or you can tape a vinyl tablecloth or shower curtain to the floor. Some of you may even have a twister mat. You can tape a twister mat on the floor as well. That can be very effective. For smaller items or for table toys, you could use things like trays, tubs, cookie sheets, whiteboards are good like you see in the picture, baskets, any type of jar as long as it's not breakable, and even clipboards. During centers, there are often children who appear disorganized because they lack direction and focus. I like to call these children the wanderers. A child's tendency to wander can be caused by, first, shorter than average attention span. This can lead them to quickly switch focus from one center to another without ever really completing one task. Disorganized play is also a common characteristic seen in children that lack adequate play experiences. This is often the case with children who are in a formal child care environment for the first time, or because they have limited social experiences with other children. Sometimes children simply feel overwhelmed by all the noise, the chaos, all the choices, all the materials. Along those same lines, children who feel insecure or unsafe will be more likely to be inhibited and have difficulty playing with a purpose. When you encounter a child whose play is disorganized, you want to start by reteaching and reinforcing the center time routines. You may need to incorporate choice boards and other visuals to help them focus. It also helps if you give children a purpose by making play suggestions and by modeling goal-oriented play. Actually sitting down to play with children or sitting down in a particular center typically motivate children to focus and to participate. In general, focus on ways to engage the children and entice them to try something new. Sometimes introducing new materials or teaching children creative ways to use old materials can help keep the play and learning experiences novel and exciting for them. So as a reminder, this webinar will be archived in case if there's any parts of it that you've missed if you've joined us late, or if there are certain notes that you didn't complete or certain information you want to go back and review. Feel free to do that at any time following the webinar. You can definitely access that on Georgia View until the end of the course. So next, we're going to move on to some questions and answers. So I'm going to take a minute and review some of these questions really quick, and then we will get started on answering some of them. Okay, so one of the questions is large group always music and movement? And the answer is no, it doesn't have to be music and movement every time. That is just one component, that is one option that you have for large group. You can focus on literacy skills. You can do an opening activity using music and movement and then move into a story time, or you could read a story one day and then have the children reenact that same story the next. You have a lot of options with large group. But definitely you don't have to limit yourself to music and movement. It's just one of the components you can add in there as a closing or opening activity. Or sometimes even using music and movement as kind of being a brain break, so children can kind of get up and move in the middle of the group is a good idea. Another question is, so from what I gather, cleanup time is not part of center time. We schedule it separately. And yes, that is true. You need to schedule cleanup time as a separate activity after your center time. So your center time on your schedule, on your daily schedule, should be 60 minutes long. And then you should, we recommend about 15 minutes of cleanup time scheduled after center time. And you can even indicate that on your daily schedule for children and for parents to know. Another question. Today I observed several of my children pulling out a lot of the items and not willing to clean up. They left the area and went somewhere else. I called them back to clean up. What would you recommend for children who won't clean up? Every teacher prefers to do their own thing when it comes to cleanup. One of the things that we were talking about earlier in the webinar was being able to identify kind of when it's problematic to have children clean up as they go and when it's beneficial. There are some children that are going to automatically clean up as they go because that's just something that maybe they're taught to do at home. At other times, we've seen this be a real problem in classrooms because children are cleaning items up that other children are still playing with. So it creates a lot of confusion, and it can even create a conflict when you have a child trying to put away a doll that another child's trying to get out. In the end, what matters most is that the areas are cleaned up. If I'm Molly and I play in center time and then I move to housekeeping, in the end, what's important is that I do my part in cleaning up the classroom. That's what kind of promotes the feeling of teamwork, the feeling that we're all in this together, that it doesn't matter if I played with these blocks. My job is to work as a team with my other classmates to make sure this area is clean. So I usually encourage teachers to pick their battles when it comes to children cleaning up as they go. And what truly matters in the end is that everybody work together during those 15 minutes of cleanup time to make sure the areas are clean. Whether they played up with that with that item or not. As far as some of the children who won't clean up, that's usually when I suggest teachers assign jobs, having the block center helper, having the inspector. Sometimes giving those jobs to the children who don't like to clean up actually motivates them to be more a part of the process. Another question reads, I was told we could not put names or have specific places for children to sit. So we'll right from the start, let us. So according to what we know, you cannot put names on the carpet specifically and force a child to sit in that specific spot every day. So you can have an area and try to encourage them to sit in that area, or you can even assign them a different area every week, things like that. But you cannot force a child to sit in a specific spot every day. You can move a child to sit with an assistant or another area on a particular day if needed. So I'm hoping that answers your question. And just as I'm thinking, kind of back to that question, the whole purpose of having kind of a designated space is just to create boundaries. Right from the start doesn't encourage assigned seating, but what they do encourage is children to have a designated spot just so they have a boundary as far as kind of where their spot, where they belong for that particular activity. But you may switch those spots up, you can change them around, so that's what they would prefer you to do, but you could still use a designated spot to help create a boundary for children. Another question says, is it ever possible for one of the wanderers to just be a child that gets bored easily or likes to be in control of his own choices? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. That having a child that's a wanderer in your class does not indicate that there's a serious problem at all. It can be frustrating for some teachers, but a wanderer sometimes just it's their play style. Sometimes it is based on their attention span. Sometimes it's based on their even their intelligence. Perhaps they're getting bored easily with certain games that other children are easily entertained by. And some children definitely revel in the fact that this is their free time, that they can freely choose one thing or the next, and there's no one there to tell them they can't. And this is very good. To be able to encourage that independence at this age is a very healthy developmental thing to encourage. So definitely, wanderers is more, being a wanderer in play isn't necessarily a problem, just as long as you feel like that child is still learning in the process. Another question reads, if we are not supposed to teach new content during large group time, then when do we teach it with our required schedule? It's one of the areas that you can teach new concepts in is in the smaller groups. During small group time, you can help use center time and large group time to reinforce those skills. But you want to work in those other opportunities throughout your day. But the reason why large group is not the best time for that is because it's because the group is too large. It's too large. If it's a simple new concept, like at the beginning of the year when you're teaching the days of the week and you're talking about weather and you're talking about the months of the year, that's doable because all the children are kind of on the same level. But when you start to get into more complex things, then that's going to be more productive doing that in a smaller group. I think we have a couple new questions coming in, so I'm just going to wait one more minute while these last few questions come in. Okay, another question came in. How do you get children to clean up if they are choosing to go to several different areas? Well, this goes back to what I mentioned in the webinar and in the first question, that it's okay if children choose several different areas. You want to try to let go of the goal of them cleaning up everything they play with before they move to the next center. If you're a teacher and you do that and your children are able to complete that task and they're successful at that task, by all means, don't change a thing. But if you have children, like I'm reading, that are choosing to go to different areas and they are having difficulty cleaning up as they go, I usually suggest to let that go, that as long as that child cleans up at the end, that's what matters. So they might visit 4 different centers before they end up in the manipulative area at the end. And when you say it's time to put our toys away, it's time to put our materials away, or whatever phrase or cue you use, the goal is to get that child to start to clean up the manipulative area. Or you could even give them the choice, like I mentioned, give them 2 positive choices. You can clean up the counting bears in the manipulative area since you just played with them, or you can go clean up the baby dolls in the dramatic play area because I saw you playing with those too. So you can give them choices, you can assign them tasks, you can give them jobs, but the main goal, and I can't stress this enough, is the main goal is to have everybody work as a team to have the materials put back where they belong at the end of center time. For safety reasons, of course, you can pick up blocks and dresses and baby dolls here and there so children aren't tripping over things. Of course, by all means, we have to maintain a safe area. But otherwise, if you see children going through the motions and just putting some things away and not others before they move to the next center, in the big picture, that is truly okay as long as at the very end they are responsible for cleaning up some area during cleanup time. Okay, here is another question. Is it okay to limit what the students play with at center time? For example, most of the kids completely empty dramatic play area but rarely play with the items they pull out. Is there a way to encourage them to use what they pull out? Well, the first answer to that question, is it okay to limit what the students play with at center time? The answer is no. You do not want to limit the items that they play with, because the whole purpose of center time is to give them free choice of centers and free choice of materials. One of the behavior that is in this example is actually a great example of an activity that 4- and 5-year-olds do. It's very developmentally appropriate. A lot of them pull out all the materials to see what's there and then choose something from those materials. But they might pull out all the materials and decide, oh, I don't want any of this after all, and then just leave it there. Or you'll have to go over and talk to them about putting it away if it's a danger to others. But that's okay. That's okay. To encourage them, you could go over and start using some of the materials that they pulled out. Like I mentioned at the end of the webinar, you could show them how to use some materials in a new way, being more imaginative and creative with materials. Sometimes children aren't sure what to use the materials for, or they get bored with the materials. So if you really want them to branch out and use those materials, I would model that and engage them in that personally. But also something to think about in this case is to create a better organization system. If children cannot see materials in a basket or a bin or a bucket, their first instinct will be to dump it all on the floor and see what's there. So one of the things that has been beneficial for a lot of teachers is to have a better organization system. So they might put all the shoes in one container, all the dresses in another container, all the silverware, all the plates in another, and then label it appropriately. That way children see what's in that box or that basket or bucket without having to dump everything on the floor to get access to it or to see what's available to them. Another question says, what is the difference between a boundary and assigning a seat? Very good question. A boundary, think of kind of an invisible boundary that says this is my space. But my space might be over here near the teacher one day, but it might be over here in the back of the group the next day. An assigned seat means that that child is required and forced to sit in that particular spot every single day. So a boundary speaks more to the purpose of having a designated spot for that child for that day. So maybe Michael sits on the red triangle and Lucy sits on the red square for today, and they know that that's kind of their spot for that particular day. So sometimes that creates a feeling of safety and security for children because they know that's where they belong. And you can even see it, teachers that use this technique, of course it's been around a long time, use it to help children know, okay, they're maybe getting too wiggly or they're bothering and touching children next to them and things like that. It helps give them some control over their behavior versus forcing them to sit in a particular spot every single day. The next question reads, how are we preparing them for kindergarten where they will be expected to sit on a specific spot during their large group if we don't work with them? Well, the answer to this question, it kind of depends on which kindergarten class that child is in. I've seen many kindergarten classes handle seating differently depending on what's going on. But you also have to remember that there is a huge amount of development that happens from a pre-K child to a kindergarten child. That's why kindergarten classes in general are designed different from pre-K classrooms, because children are in a different place cognitively, they are in a different place socially and emotionally. From 5 to 6, there is a huge amount of development that happens that impacts their ability to understand that concept and to not view an assigned seat as something very, very punitive. But one of the things you can do is, if this is an issue or if a teacher is concerned that they aren't preparing their children in their class in this regard, is to contact the kindergarten teachers in their area if they haven't yet and actually kind of see what strategy they use, and then you can check with your pre-K consultant and kind of compare the two and see what the pre-K consultant suggests you do in that situation. So definitely on all these questions and situations, never hesitate to ask your pre-K consultant, because they know your specific classroom and they know your specific makeup of children best, so they can provide you very concrete suggestions and answers to these questions. Another question reads, we have several students who like to play with the walkie-talkies during centers, and they often end up running around with them. Do you have any suggestions for offering them opportunities where they can do this safely? Well, one of the first thing that comes to my mind is perhaps save the walkie-talkies for outside play. Walkie-talkies might not be the best type of materials to use indoors, because the whole purpose of walkie-talkies is to have a big distance between the two children. So you're going to have one child going to one end of the classroom and the other child to the other end of the classroom. So if that's disruptive in your particular classroom, then I would suggest you reserving the walkie-talkies as an outdoor play material instead. I think we have 1 or 2 more questions coming in, so I'll pause for a minute. If a child, the next question reads, if a child constantly puts hands on or feet on another student at large group, can we let them sit in a chair to help? And the answer is definitely yes, you can do that. Alternative seating is a good solution for many children. Now, you would want to help teach them more self-control in the process. So you can kind of tell them, give them the choice or the option to sit in that chair for a large group to help them gain more self-control, and you can reinforce them keeping their hands to themselves and things like that. There's lots of teachers that use that technique successfully. There's some teachers that even created a kind of a safe place that they can move around, whether it be kind of a bean bag or things like that. And if that child's feeling overwhelmed and out of control, then oftentimes teachers give them the option to sit in that bean bag or to sit in that little safe place, but they're still in earshot and they are still able to see what's going on in that large group. So they're still learning and participating, but they're given the space that they need to be appropriate. You have another question coming in? What do you do with a child who won't choose a center until her friends have decided where they will go? This sounds kind of more of an indicator of the little girl's personality. There are some children that are leaders and there are some children that are more followers. It's okay that this little girl does that. One of the things you can encourage her to do is to continue to encourage her to choose what she likes. But at this stage in her development, what she likes might truly be playing with her friends. So wherever her friends are, that's where she wants to be. And that's okay. That's okay. Usually what I like to do in a situation like this, when you have a child that's more of a follower, is to try to get them into more leadership roles just so they feel more confident and more secure in themselves, just in case if that's an issue. But there's many children that are followers that are very flexible and easygoing, and self-confidence is not an issue. But I'd go ahead and kind of balance that out depending on, again, you know this child best, so you know their personality. But all in all, this would not be an indicator of any type of developmental problem, and that would be okay. Okay. We have a couple more questions coming in. Just one more moment. Okay, this next question reads, can every child have a boundary or just the wiggle worms? This really depends on you and your classroom. Some classrooms, the circle area, the large group area, is designed in a way where it's going to be best for every child to have a boundary, or maybe you have a group where you have about 50% of your children are wiggle worms. So there's really no wrong or right to this particular question. You can either have a boundary for every child, or you can just reserve the boundaries for the wiggle worms that need it, depending on what's going to work best for your group of children and your classroom setup. Okay, we're just about out of time. So again, feel free. I know there might be several more questions that come up during the discussion board. Please visit the discussion section of Georgia View to see what the discussion board assignment is. There'll be plenty of opportunities for further discussion and questions on this topic over the next month or so. But I thank you for joining us for this next webinar, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.